Hi there, guys, and welcome back to the channel. As promised, we're coming back to all things Americans moving to France. Long overdue, and I've got Gordon here, my guest, back on the channel. And today we're going to be talking about the financial aspects of moving to France, or partially moving to France in Gordon's case. So I know that an awful lot of you are maybe considering doing this from the US or Canada or Australia or New Zealand as a second home purchase. And this could be really some key information on how, well, in this case, Gordon made it happen for himself. I'd like to underline in this video, we are not giving financial advice. So this is just Gordon's story. We're not advising you to do anything in that context, but it's just to give you a bit of background on what financially you could do to make this dream a reality, maybe a little bit sooner than planned. You know, a lot of people that I speak to over time are always saying, well, we're waiting for retirement, we're waiting for this. Well, Gordon actually made it happen way beforehand. And I think you're a great advocate, Gordon, of how this is actually possible and people don't necessarily realize that they could do it. So we're going to be approaching three different topics. The first one being Gordon's story. How did you make it happen financially? The second one, I think, that I'd be really keen to get your viewpoint on, Gordon, is how do you run two households? So what does that look like, and how do you make that work for you whilst you're in France and not in the US and still running your US household? And point number three, I think this is the one that's always going to be really interesting, I think, to people, is that if you then decide to make it happen full time, how would you compare the financials, pros, cons, costs of insurance, of living, etc., in France compared to the US? So with no further ado, Gordon, I'll hand over the mic to you.
Great, thanks, Richard. So first question that you had was sort of how did we make it happen? So we decided, frankly, during the pandemic, that we really wanted to spend a lot more time in France. We'd visited multiple times, always enjoyed our holidays here, but you know, as one was sitting at home for 18 months, you start to have conversations about what do you really want from the rest of your life. And that led us to realize that we really wanted to spend a lot more time in France. We started to do the research and started to understand what it was all about. And at the end of the day, it actually was easier and less expensive than we ever imagined it would be. Housing costs are significantly less than in the US, at least in our area. We live in the northern part of the north central part of the US. And frankly, everyone's dream is to have a cabin up at the lake. Cabins, lake property is very expensive in Minnesota. And our place in France, in a lovely little town here in Southwest France, probably cost, I don't know, I would say maybe a third or certainly less than half of what we would have spent on a much smaller place on a cabin in northern Minnesota. So this became our dream. Making it happen was, there were some steps we had to go through and some false starts that we had. So our initial thought was kind of more along the lines of what we would do if we were looking for a second home in the US. We'll take out a conventional mortgage. Obviously, you have to do that with a French bank if you want to do it. US banks can't secure collateral in another country. So we talked to three different either brokers or banks, and they were all gung-ho and happy to help us until they found out that we were both entrepreneurs. We have our own consulting firm, and that shut the conversations down. It might be a different situation if you were fully employed somewhere. I don't know. But for us, it became really not an option. And we'd had some money saved up, but it wasn't enough. And we were, really stuck at one point. And I talked to a friend who has 3 different properties in France, and he said, well, what he had done and what we ended up doing was actually leveraging the equity in our US home. So we kept our first mortgage the same. The value of the house had increased substantially from when we had last refinanced the house. So we had a significant amount of equity. We redid the second mortgage on that house, and that freed up enough cash to do, plus our savings, to do what we wanted to in France. So the house in France is actually paid for, and that's a nice thing as we get on to part 2 here in a minute. That's actually a nice thing for us, is that we don't have to worry about any mortgage payments for France. And then we simply paid off that second mortgage over time, against the house in the US. And so now we have the equity back in the house in the US. We have the house in France as repairs are needed, or we want to make improvements on the house in France. We can pull from that equity again because it's a line of credit. So again, we're not trying to provide financial advice here, but that was what we did. Because the nice thing is when you refinance a second mortgage or have a second mortgage in a line of credit, you can use it for literally anything you want, including your dream of moving to France.
Fantastic, Gordon. That's such valuable insights on how you made
Not
things.
financial advice.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think what would be, just to follow on before we jump on to point number two, could you tell us more about the affordability of France, how that worked for you? The comparisons. I know obviously you engaged our services for several things initially, which was searching for properties. You did an awful lot of searching for years, I believe, online. Could you tell me more about that side of things? I mean, just so people understand how affordable it is to buy in France.
Yes, let me address actually two things about that. One is there's lots of resources for looking for properties in France. The challenge is, unlike in the US, there's no such thing as a multi-list. So in the US, for those viewers who might not be in the US, there's what's called a multi-list, and that lists every property for sale, whether it's by any agent or anybody anywhere in the country. You can find a property that's for sale, and all in one place. Different real estate agents may repackage that and sort of put a different face on it for their websites, but they're all going after the same database. In France, each agent keeps their own listings, and so you'll find that there's many duplicates because there's no obligation to have a unique listing. You'll find the same property listed for 4 different prices, and they're aggregator websites, but they're not comprehensive. So during the pandemic, every morning I would go out and look at probably 4 or 5 different aggregator websites for the areas that we were looking at, which was way too broad to start with. And then, we'd find a few agents that we really liked the listings they had, and they described things well. They were in areas that we were interested in, and we would kind of focus on those about once a week because new things come off and on all the time. So finding those was a challenge, and we had done some research, and everyone tells you to start with a budget, and that's absolutely true. You have to decide. There's a whole lot of factors you have to take into consideration. We wanted something in a town because we wanted to be able to walk to restaurants and shops. I was over at the Monday Market in Mirande, which has been going on for almost 800 years. Walked over there this morning and bought some lovely fresh vegetables. Artichokes are in season, and it was wonderful. And we wanted that experience. We didn't want to have to get in a car to go someplace. We wanted a small town. We didn't want to, because we wanted to get to know people. So as I was walking back, I saw our mail person over at the market. I said hello to her. I saw the woman who runs the little patisserie, said hi to her on the way back. That was the kind of experiences that we wanted to be able to have. So we wanted a house in a town, smaller village. There's about 3,500 people in our village, in our town, which then gives us access to all the services very close by. You look for a certain size, of course. Do you want a relatively new house? Do you want an older building? We wanted an older structure. And we were fortunate enough that we found the structure itself was very inexpensive, but of course the renovation on a structure that had been empty for 50 plus years was significant, but again, significantly less than comparable properties in the US. So I think there's really just the issue is, narrowing down your choices geographically, the attributes you want, beautiful houses out in the countryside, but you have to get in your car to go everywhere. Which do you prefer? So again, we had our preferences. We were drawn to the Gers because it's extremely affordable. There's many properties for 250,000 US, sort of plus or minus. If you're willing to spend a little bit more, you can get a lot more. But the value for money is fantastic in France, especially in rural France. Paris is expensive. Marseille is expensive. Nice is expensive. All the big cities are going to be very costly. But when you get into the smaller towns, and there's lots of those that are very vibrant and real market towns, then you're going to find that there's great affordability. One little thing that I thought was interesting that we read at one point was if you're looking, we did a lot of work with Google Maps and Street View and things like that just to sort of see what the area looked like. If you go on Google Maps and you have a town that you're interested in, if there are several banks in the town, it probably means that there's a lot of commercial activity going on, which means there's shops, which means there's people come to town, which means it's market town. And so if you're drawn to that sort of market town environment that I think a lot of people are, that's one little attribute to look for. I went through and literally counted the number of bakeries and pharmacies and butcher shops in, I don't know, towns throughout about 5 or 6 different departments that we were interested in, and put together a spreadsheet because that's just the kind of person I am. But there's lots of ways to sort of decide where that right spot for you is. But honestly, it's probably going to be a lot less expensive than your primary home, and maybe even if you were considering a second home somewhere in the US, it's going to be a lot less expensive as well.
Thanks, Gordon. That's great. But give us a taste. Give us some flavors. What kind of figures are you looking at in terms of, well, obviously your prices is maybe slightly out of date because it's a couple of years now since you've purchased and we renovated the property for you. But what kind of flavor are people going to get for an alternative to potentially, as you mentioned, a timeshare or something along those lines?
Certainly. So our house is, trying to think in US square footage terms, I think it's about 1,500 to 2,000 square feet. We have 2 bedrooms, 2 offices, living room, salon, kitchen, of course, laundry room, 2 full bathrooms and a half bath, in a 200-year-old building, was all in about 265,000 US. If you want a big farmhouse, you might pay a couple hundred to 300,000 for the building, and then whatever renovations you want. But we felt very fortunate that we ended up with, really as the mandate to French Connections was, anything you can keep it. Anything you need to make new, make it new. So all new plumbing, electrical, heating, air conditioning, kitchen, bathrooms, all new because they were ancient and dangerous. But we kept the walls, we kept the floors, we kept as much of it as we possibly could. And so that's sort of been our experience. Again, your results will vary. But there are, as we were looking, we had set a budget of 250 to our real stretch budget was probably 300,000. And we looked at hundreds, if not thousands of properties. There are and we looked all over the south of France, like all across from Italy to the Atlantic and up to the Dordogne, about halfway up in France. Too large of a geographic area, but I looked at a lot of properties. But and I had my favorites were probably numbered honestly probably in the hundreds. And then frankly, one thing I did want to mention as well is we did hire Richard to help us at French Connections to help us to actually look for a specific property. One of the challenges of being an English speaker, we speak some French, is that if you contact an agent, we did this a couple of times ourselves. We contacted agents directly, English-speaking agents directly, and got either no response whatsoever to an email inquiry, or email back and then no more communication. Once they found out, honestly, that we were Americans, I think they feel like you're going to waste their time and just go looking at properties for fun on a vacation. That obviously wasn't our intention, but the French-speaking resources and people that French Connections has mean that your inquiries are taken seriously. French Connections set up, I believe it was either 8 or 10 different property viewings for us in the span of about a week and a half. We had a very full schedule when we came in September of 2021, which was even on the heels of the pandemic and masks were still in order. But we saw a lot of properties in a very short amount of time.
Awesome, Gordon. That's great. I think the key things here is that I'm sorry to hear of your experience with realtors, but there are a lot of good companies out there, of course, that do cater for Americans. But I completely hear what you're saying. And the one thing is that there's not one really source of searching tools. You know, you can't really search an area, so to speak, just by drawing a map. And I think, yeah, local knowledge is great. Feet on the ground in a way, obviously an awful lot easier to do so. But there are huge amounts of opportunities really in terms of second home purchases or indeed investment properties, you know, that
Yes.
I think people could consider, because the rental market is buoyant at the moment, and one of the requirements of the all fatal visa application. So yeah, definitely really worth for you guys watching today, bearing in mind that my top tip actually kind of is contradictory to a little bit to what you're saying with cost, Gordon, which is for me what I find really important is first define somewhere that you actually, and then this is difficult if you've never been to France before, right? But first define exactly, to join Gordon's point, somewhere where you're going to be comfortable year round. Because especially if it's a second home, you don't want to rock up in December and everything be closed. You know, one of the things that you're going to want to do is be able to enjoy this home year round. It's not a timeshare, it's your own property. For those that might choose to rent the property in the meantime, that happens, of course, and it's quite popular to do so. You also want to make sure that you've got some activity year round, so people want to rent your property. So I think for me, it's also just making sure that the year round usability of that property is there.
Mm-hmm.
Because having something and paying a premium to live on the coast or the mountains, and if you don't have that kind of year round seasonality, it's maybe not going to suit exactly what you're looking for. So that's a top tip for me. But moving on swiftly.
No, and let me just really quickly, Richard, I would agree. We had looked in, we had actually found a very beautiful property. We were initially really taken with this property, but it was in a very touristy town, only about an hour from here. And when we arrived in September, we were looking at properties. It was the end of September, and it was pretty clear that the town was quieting down for the winter. It's a very tourist-driven economy in that particular location. We've been back in the summertime. It's very, very busy in the summertime, but it's absolutely dead in the wintertime. And I have a feeling the population, you know, clears out. Many of the people who are there over the summer enjoy it very much, and they clear out in the winter. Finding a place that has some level of activity year-round is important. The summer's always busier, right? There's more vacations, there's more tourists, there's more going on. But in the town where we did end up, it is a market town, so there's always something happening, even if the activity level is less than in the summer.
Yeah, no, I think it's a crucial point and quite often underlooked. It's you know, the romance of buying a big property in an estate in the countryside, and then, you know, finding that you're too far away from amenities is another reoccurring problem, I think. Access to international airports and travel being another one. You know, the airports closing in smaller airports around the country, access to train, of course, because rail is quite a comfortable way of traveling, albeit it still remains that these local connection flights with Paris, I think, are probably the smoothest ways for US Canadians to have second home enjoyment. To talk about that maybe another time is how you get to France. I think that joins up actually quite nicely on point number 2. How do you find running 2 properties between France and the US? And I guess we could kind of join in the economy of actually getting to your French home. Do you want to share a bit of gold with our viewers, please, Gordon?
Yes, absolutely. So we do maintain a house in the US, as well as our place in France, where we are now. You know, it's really just a matter of deciding how you're going to manage that. So we have a cat in the US that we don't want to bring over to France because he's a little bit older. We just felt like that would be difficult. The travel would be difficult for him. It simply just takes time to get from the central part of the US to the southwest France. You know, roughly minimum 13 hours on a plane in an airport, you know, kind of total travel time. And then you have buffer time on each end and other things. Anyway, so we decided to maintain the house in the US. If we didn't have a cat who's running our lives, we could effectively shut the house down. You can have the city turn off the water so you don't have to worry about leaks. You set the heating to a minimum level, have somebody check in on it every now and again, and that's that. We are still paying a mortgage in the US, so we have that expense, but we also live in a climate where we get snow and it's, grass in the summer, and so we have somebody to maintain the yard for us. And we, of course, are paying because we have house sitters that come in. We are then paying for basically all the running costs of the house, insurance, heat, all those things, because we do have somebody that comes in. We find those people, and we've been very blessed to have just wonderful people, but there are a couple of websites, and I would encourage anyone who's considering sort of this part-time thing to really look at, especially to maintain your house in the US, but also to come live in your house in France if you don't want to try and rent it out, just somebody to make sure everything's okay all the time. And the arrangement essentially is they get free rent. We get somebody to take care of our cat that's going to, really care for them and be there. Our cat's very social. It really wants people around. So, it's a nice trade-off. They come, they get to live for free. We get somebody to take care of the house. We feel good about it. They communicate with us very well, typically. We've had 4 or 5 different people, and all of them have their own stories, and it's interesting why they want to do it. But, the bottom line is they enjoy, finding a different place to stay, and, are then responsible for the upkeep of the house, and we pay for everything, but they're responsible. If there was a problem, they would be there to arrange for, the resolution of that problem if there was one.
Right, Gordon, that's awesome. But again, let's get specific with figures. Like, this is what people want to hear, right? So, of course, you've got your running costs in the US. We get that. I mean, I think all of your viewers are going to know and understand what those are. They're living in their properties. What does it look like financially to have to travel to France? How do you plan that? Do you book it ahead? Do you have a special airline that you use? Do you have a vehicle in France? What
Sure.
goes on?
Great questions. So we have taken a couple of different approaches to travel. I'm rather tall, and I find most airline seats incredibly uncomfortable. So we tend to not book the most expensive class, but the upgraded class, because frankly, I need a little more leg room. It is a long flight. I mean, coming from the US to, and certainly Australia is even more, but coming from the US or Canada is going to be, just to get, on the ground anywhere in Europe is going to take 8 or 9 hours minimum, depending on where you're coming from. It may be a lot more. So we're in a Delta hub city. We fly Delta. We found it very convenient to find an airline where you can check your baggage at your point of origination and have it delivered to you at the airport that you're going to end up with. Our airport locally is Toulouse. It's about an hour and a half. We'll get to how we get back and forth with that momentarily. But if you're ending up in Paris, if you're ending up in Toulouse or Lyon or Bordeaux, you're going to want to make sure your luggage arrives there, without you having to handle it 4 times. In the past, we took a lovely airline that we enjoyed very much. But it only flies between New York and Paris. So we had to get to New York, transfer the bags because they don't code share with anyone, go on this airline, transfer the bags, and then end up to our final destination. And we booked tickets just the other day, and we decided not to do that again because it was a bit of a pain, and it was just much easier to put the bags on in Minneapolis, pick them up in Toulouse, done. We do book, in advance when we know what our dates are. We just booked for a return flight. We're heading back to the US in a couple of weeks, but we'll be returning in mid-April for another couple of months. And then we have some obligations in the middle of the summer, and we'll be going back to the US for that. So we try to book them. We tend to come, make that trip a couple times a year. And it's just one of the things that you save for.
What does it cost?
Our tickets were about $5,600, and again, that's flying. I don't remember what the class is called, but it's a Comfort Plus kind of medium level class. It's not the cheapest seats. If you're okay sitting, in the back of the plane, 4th person in on a row of 5, that's you can pay less. But our tickets were for 2 of us, round trip about $5,600, maybe $5,900 with tax and whatnot.
And so how much does it cost to fly from Paris to Toulouse. Toulouse for those
That's
that,
all included.
oh, that's
So that
included.
gets us from Minneapolis to Paris, Paris to Toulouse. We go through typically Charles de Gaulle or Amsterdam are the two airports, that we tend to fly through. Other airlines, I think American Airlines and maybe United fly through London Heathrow, but there are direct flights from London to Toulouse as well. And I'm concentrating on Toulouse because that's where we are. But that serves, sort of South Central France very
Yeah,
well.
it's worth mentioning that Toulouse Airport is the home of Airbus, so
Yes,
national
lots
airline.
of flights.
So lots
Hopefully
of
they're not testing out the planes, but I think they're solid.
lots of flights, yeah. And I always say, look, it's if there's something missing, they'll put it back on pretty quickly. So it's always a good option, right?
Yes,
No, that's great. So I mean, that's the affordability of it
yes.
happening, how to get to and from.
And the thing is that if there are people who we used to do this when we would come. We would stop in Paris for a few days, just to enjoy Paris. I mean, there's everybody knows all the wonderful things and wonderful food that one can enjoy in Paris. I mean, it does obviously that's going to add some expense to your trip because you got hotels and food and whatnot in a big city. But then you can either get back on a plane and come south, or as Richard said, you could take a train. Trains are easy, super comfortable. Would hope that most of your viewers, have at least tried that. If not, I would encourage them to when you're next in France and looking to travel around. Very frequent, very comfortable, easy on and off. And just, once you do it and figure
And
it
how
out,
much
it's an
does that
expense.
cost, Gordon? How much does a TGV Paris?
So the high-speed train, the TGV that runs, pretty well direct from several cities in the south, really a string all along the southern part of France, I think is about 150 each way per person. So, not outrageous. And we can get from Toulouse to Paris in about 4 hours. It's sort of about the same whether you're going from Narbonne or Nice or Aix-en-Provence or whatever. It's all about 3.5 to 4 hours, watching the countryside zip by at 200 or 300 kilometers an hour.
Yeah, and of course the advantage that you can do some work, maybe catch up on some emails and do stuff
Sure.
like that.
Yeah, and the road system around France is fantastic. Our train got canceled one time. We were heading back to Paris, and so we just kept our car and ended up driving over. Took a couple of days to do it. It's about an 8-hour drive if we were to do it straight from here. So we broke that up into two parts and stayed at a small bed and breakfast along the way, and had really a wonderful time. To answer your question from earlier, yes, we do have a car in France because we're here frequently enough. We found that to be really an essential item. It sits unused most of the week, honestly. We use it to run to the supermarket or whatever. If we need to go up into the next town for a bigger grocery store, we use it for that, obviously. But most days we don't use it because we have everything in our little town here, as I mentioned before. But it's, in this very rural part of France, honestly, things are far enough apart that I would find it terribly inconvenient to have to call a taxi every time I wanted to. Every time I wanted to go up to the next town over for whatever reason. So we do have a car. And you asked about sort of the cost of, I think the origin of all this was asking about the cost of running a house in France as well. So
Yeah.
as I mentioned, our house in France is paid for. We don't have a mortgage, so that's taken care of. Property taxes are, I would say, on a sort of square footage basis, maybe comparable to or slightly less than a house in the US, at least where we are. But because we have a smaller house here, the physical size, it's less money. House insurance is less, car insurance is less, health insurance is less. We do maintain all of our coverages in the US, so we have that double cost for now at least. And and I know you wanted to talk about specifics, but I think we pay about 300 a year for car insurance, which is substantially less than we pay in the US. I think we pay a couple $100 a year for homeowners insurance. And the health insurance we have today was about 3,000, but we're looking at policies that might save us some money off of that.
Fantastic. I think obviously we knew about the car aspect because we actually helped you source. Well, this is the second car.
Yeah.
But to jump onto that subject, obviously, I just want to make everybody aware that that's a service that we do provide for clients that are staying locally with us. We also have storage, which Gordon uses at our head office, as well as having our own driver available to drop you guys off with your own vehicle and then come back and store it and make sure that it's clean before you collect it for the next time around. So that's obviously not available all around France, but if you are going to be staying close to where we have our head office, which is just outside of Auch, in the region of the 32, of course, we can help with that. So, and we do have partners with Pop Valet as well that can deliver and collect vehicles from any airport if you need to save money on car hire, because it is expensive here. Right?
Yeah, and so we are about an hour and a half from Toulouse, where our house is. We use the services Richard described, where the gentleman will actually drive our car. He takes us in our car to the airport, brings the car back, stores it, and then comes and collects us when we return. Taxi services as well. They cost a little bit more, but I think we spent about 230 euros for the hour and a half round trip. I mean, it's not a short drive. So while $230 on a taxi seems expensive, they're also driving you for an hour and a half and have to drive themselves back an hour and a half. So for 3 hours, it doesn't sound quite so bad. So we use that.
Still not consequential. It's not as cheap as an Uber ride, etc. So you've got to consider that if you're going to be moving to the countryside. I think we can name Darren. His claim to fame. He'll probably be watching this soon. So the point being is that we can provide that service for our clients that are going to be staying nearby. But I think what's interesting as well, maybe briefly, to cost of living, cost of a car. Car in France, I think you paid about your first car you paid about 14,000 euros for. That was an electric car, full plug-in, smaller vehicle, Renault Zoe, which is a great vehicle. But it wasn't good for you because you couldn't go on those further journeys. You then upgraded in terms of a premium vehicle, which is an Audi Q2 that we helped you source. Yeah. So that was just shy of 30,000 euros, I believe.
Correct.
Got to allow for a little bit more money for vehicles in France. And these were second-hand, previously enjoyed vehicles, but very low mileage, and that we help source. And we can do that, of course. But I think you've got to understand that in France, generally speaking, just talk about cost, vehicles are probably 20% on average more expensive than in the English-speaking world. That being said, they hold their value a lot better. So in context, you're spending more initially, you spend less on insurance, but you retain more value over time because people maybe don't feel the need to change their vehicles quite as much in France. And so that's just something to consider for you if you're viewing in the intent of having a second home. Actually, on the face of it, buying a car may seem expensive, but it will retain its value quite well. If you've got the option like Gordon has to be able to store it, etc., and have a valet drop off, collect, and it's going to pay dividends for itself. Yeah, it's going to be really worth an awful lot of money for you saved.
Yeah, no, and especially if you're in a town, because like I said, our car sits, doesn't move for 4 or 5 days at a time, typically. If you're in a town, then a lot of times you're walking, not very far, for us anyway, not very far at all, but you're walking to where you're going. And so we drive in terms of mileage, we drive a lot less than we do in the US, because in the US, to go to the grocery store, we have to get in the car. You drive, not very far, but a couple miles, a mile back and forth. To go to any restaurant, you're driving back and forth. Here, we can walk to a lot of those things. So we put on a lot less miles. We've used the car a lot less than a comparable time in the US. Gas is more expensive. I mean, I think anyone who's been to France and made the mistake of thinking that the 2 euros was per gallon and found out that it was per liter, figured out pretty quickly that gas is more expensive than in the US. But, most of the cars get great mileage. We gassed up our car before we drove to Toulouse recently, and then drove to Toulouse and back on less than a quarter of a tank of gas. And that probably cost us, I don't know, 15 or 20 euros total for the gas round trip to Toulouse, which is, I don't know, 90 or 100 kilometers away. So
overall, owning a vehicle in France is cheaper than in the US.
It just is. Absolutely. Yes.
Good stuff. That's wonderful. I think, again, the affordability of running the two households means that you're going to have to consider these things. Briefly, before we move on to the considerations on moving to France full time and what that would imply cost wise, can you just run us through briefly the comparison of what it costs to run a house, like electricity, water, what gas de ville? I don't know. I don't even think you got gas de ville, so it's just electricity and water for you. But the context being is what? How does that compare to the US?
So it's interesting because, of course, our house in the US is being used continuously throughout the year, either by us or a house sitter. Our house in France sits empty when we're not here. So significant ups and downs in the utilization. Last winter, we had a very significant electric bill, but I'm hoping that the way we have arranged things this year, both in terms of timing, the weather's been more mild, that it's not going to be so bad. It's basically what they have estimated our bill to be, and the system is a little bit different. In the US, you get a bill monthly. You can pay that bill. You can get an averaging service, at least with our electricity. And we pay about $250 for gas and electric in the US for our house there. They take 110 euros here. So they're thinking that's the proper estimate for a house like ours. So it's about half of the cost. Electricity is going up in cost. The unit cost is going up in France. So, your results will vary. It depends on how big your house is too, and the weather. We have a decent house, a decent sized house, but it's stacked vertically. So my office on the top floor is always warmer than the bottom floor, right? Because the heat is, I'm getting the benefit of all the heat from all four floors as they come up. The water, similarly, they estimate it and you get a bill annually, I believe. I mean, it doesn't, we're used to getting at least a monthly or quarterly statement from the city, but we do have that, and we haven't yet seen that, so we're not sure exactly what that's going to be. The cost for internet and phone is generally substantially less than in the US. I think we pay 50 euros for our internet. In the US, it's 3 times that, 4 times that. And we have fiber optic actually to every house in the goal is every house in the Gers has access to fiber optic by 2025. So very high speed connections for frankly a very low cost. The cost for cell service, I have a dual SIM on my iPhone, US and French. So I maintain my number in the US, but then you can add the SIM for France, and that's again significantly less than in the US. So probably I think it's about 60 or 80 euros in France, and I think again we're paying more than that because we have a family plan with a lot more people on it, frankly, in the US.
So thank you for that, Gordon. So overall, it's fair to say that if you've paid for your property in France, if your second home is fully paid for, like
Exactly.
yours, the ongoing costs are fairly low, really. Especially you can afford to do this without renting it. So you're actually able to maintain this property, to have this thing without the cost of rental, right?
The cost of running the house, and obviously we're not eating it, that's basically the cost for maintaining this property available to us. And we've chosen not to rent it out because it is our home. But I think it's probably less than $500 a month. And even so you pay two taxes as a second homeowner. You pay two different taxes in France, the taxe foncière and the taxe d'habitation. Together, ours is under 3,000 a year. So that's $250 to $300. You've got electricity, water, and then you maintain your cell service, and it's probably about $500 or $600 a month total.
That's awesome. I mean, it's just good to hear, what it actually costs. I'm sure you guys as viewers will be super interested to get that information, because I think these are things that people just don't really talk about, right? You're just looking at the price of the property, maybe the fact that the property looks cheaper on the face of it. And of course, in our context, we were able, with the services that we provide, to encompass all of the work on the property and the renovation on the property on a fixed plan, right? So you knew exactly how much
Yes,
you were
it was
going to
important.
spend.
It was very important. The other thing that we explicitly chose and was not to have an outdoor space. In retrospect, it might have been nice to find a property with a small outdoor space that we could not have to worry about maintenance on, but to have a bit of outdoor space. A lot of people want that. The bigger the yard, the more it requires maintenance. And if you're not here significant parts of the year, that maintenance often still needs to occur. In the summertime, someone needs to mow the property if you're not around. The growing season in this part of France is very long, and things are very green even now in February. So, maintaining your property year round, even, especially when you're not here. If you can do it yourself, fine. But you'll need to pay for someone to maintain that outdoor space if you're not going to be around full time. And we don't have that issue, thank goodness. So.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I can also jump in on owning a large property in France is that, you've also got to account for the cost of the machinery to maintain, let alone somebody obviously do it for you. And that quickly creeps up. So as a second homeowner, I think there are loads of opportunities for outdoor stuff in communal parks, in restaurants that have got lovely parks, etc. So I think I'd jump in there and sort of say, before you think about this, the romance of having this big, vast area that you can sit out and have a coffee on might be something that you might want to reconsider as a second homeowner. And I think the opportunity always for my clients, and specifically in your case, Gordon, is that if one day you did make this more permanent move, well, you could actually just keep your property, rent that one out, have it as an investment property, make a good return on the rental, and buy something else by the time you sold your main house in the US, right? So, because I think this is something that's really important for our viewers and people that are going to be listening to this. France is a great area to invest in because especially in the rural areas, the market is not saturated whatsoever. So you can buy and you can then have a great ROI on rentals. I think a property like Gordon's, to give you some real figures, I was recently offered, Gordon declined politely, but he might reconsider one day. But I think I was offered about €2,500 a month to rent a property like yours, Gordon. And that's a property that's cost you 270 odd thousand euros, 280 odd thousand euros, including all fees. So you can see the ROI is great, is massive on those kind of figures. And, quite frankly, you're not going to achieve those anywhere else really in the world, right? The cost of acquisition is low. I think one thing that's worth just mentioning to viewers, of course, we help with these stages, but the processing of the purchase of the actual property, I think is very securing in for both the seller and the buyer in France. So you've got two parts of the contract of the purchase. There's a fee that's going to be around 9%, which is of the value of the property being sold, so not that one with renovations for you. So that was an incredibly low fee for you because we were looking at a property that was like 30,000 euros, I think, on the face of it before renovations. And so those elements, of course, we can help with. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us. But the basic of it is that both the seller and the buyer are protected by a contract. Once you've past 11 days of signing that first stage of the contract, there will be a small deposit that will be requested, generally speaking around 10%, and that will be lost if you suddenly decided not to purchase the property after 11 days. And equally, the seller enters into full obligation of selling once he's past that point. So really safe place to buy a house. I think that's something that's maybe you want to share a little bit on the experience of maybe the time and the stuff that takes a bit longer here, right? But it's very safe.
It does. One of the things that we've learned the most in France is patience, especially when dealing with bureaucracy. Things just simply take time, and being impatient about it will not move anything faster. So it did take. I believe we said yes in late September, early October of 2021 on Oh my goodness, on Valentine's Day. So this coming up this Wednesday will be 2 years. So 2022, on February the 14th was when all the final documents were actually signed. I remember bugging Richard mercilessly throughout that winter time, saying, "When's it going to be ready? When is it going to be ready?" And there's just a lot of process that occurs. There's inspections that have to occur. There's documentation about everything from the flood zone to the exact square footage to termite, inspections and all sorts of things that must be done, before that final paperwork can actually occur. But it all went well. We were able to do it remotely. We were in the U.S. at the time, and then we actually moved in May. But the delay was only because of the continuing renovations. It was not in a state to move in until, frankly, probably 24 hours before we got here, so I understand it. But a lot of last minute activity in any kind of renovation. But yeah, essentially, it went very smoothly. The notaire, I always describe the notaire to people. It's a very different system than in the U.S., but they serve as essentially a tax collector, a lawyer for, frankly, both parties, and a title company. So they're securing the title to make sure that you have a clear title to the property. They're reviewing the contract and making sure it's legal and in conformity with all the laws as Richard said, they're very extensive. And then they also collect the taxes, which is part of that 9% that you're paying ends up with the French government as a property transfer tax, I suppose is the best way to put it.
Yeah, I think that's really important. So that 9%, 6% pretty much is going to the French state to say thank you, welcome to France. The rest is going to be split between notaires because you can choose to have two separate notaires, and I would encourage people to do that. It doesn't. They just split the work, right? It doesn't cost any more money. It just splits the work. Of course, with clients of our company, you can use my family notaires that we've been working with for over 40 years, and when my parents first moved to this country, and so yeah, definitely we can do things like distant signatures. Some might refuse because between notaires there's a kind of argument that sometimes they don't want to do distant signatures. They feel that that's taken away from their job and the way that things should be done in France. So you've got to be conscious that that is available. So whether you use our services or not, please make sure, because flying back to the US just to keep somebody happy in an office regionally in France is maybe not the best financial decision. Or let's protect the environment as well right here.
Yes.
And just doing a flight to keep somebody happy on 300 years of tradition of notaires potentially in their family is maybe not the best way. So definitely reach out if you want more help with that. But I think it's just really reassuring compared to the US or the UK, which I obviously understand and privy to an awful lot. It's just so much safer to purchase in France. There's so much more protection, more processes. That takes time, but it's very reassuring to have that. And it's probably worthwhile having your own notaire, just in context, because the estate agent might tell you, well, this is going to take longer with this too, but eventually you're getting this in your fees anyway, so be as well have that help and advice. And before purchasing, it's always worthwhile also considering inheritance rules and taxes in France, because there are quite a few solutions that would be happy to share if you want to reach out to me and give you some advice around that. Again, this is not financial advice, it's just good things to know before entering in contracts in France. Thanks, Gordon, for that. I think that's great to have heard those steps and how you've made that happen. So last point, and then we'll leave it for today, and hopefully there'll be loads of questions from this, and we'll be able to continue and do more of these. But last point, if you were to move to France, right? So if you were to say, okay, I want to make it I'm going to sell up lock, stock and barrel, and I want to move to France. What are the things that are maybe running through your head if that is something that you're thinking about doing, but financially, how would you prepare for that as well?
So one of the things that I'll mention, and maybe it harkens back to our prior conversations as well, but we decided not to bring furniture over. We essentially moved in large suitcases with every trip. We would bring that season's clothing, but there's marvelous secondhand furniture in France. You can buy French antiques for less than you can in the US because they're French. And the local brocante or vide grenier is a great source for furniture, large and small. There's also new furniture that you can, simply order. There's IKEA, and you can order that and they will deliver and you can, put it all together. So we chose not to sort of move a household. And I've known people who moved to Europe and just had a container full of stuff that they moved. That didn't suit us at all. We simply brought clothing and a few, special items that we wanted, but it all fit in a suitcase. And I think that was, is an important consideration, is how are you going to make that move? The financial aspect of, frankly, living in France is really a bonus for the U.S. Right now, the relationship between the euro and the dollar remains very strong, and and frankly, with where that is today, we find that it's probably about 2/3 to a half of the daily living costs in France versus in the US. Simply the cost for fresh vegetables, where the quality is arguably substantially better than many places in the US for fruits and vegetables, unless you're in a growing area directly, like California or Texas. We're in Minnesota, and everything has to travel a great distance to get to us by and large. So meats, fruit and vegetables, normal grocery items are all substantially less. I kind of did an analysis at one point and I found it was about 60% of the cost here in France, just for those daily living costs. And I'm not even counting, like, French wine is cheaper than France than in the US. That's not fair. It is, and it's wonderful, but not necessarily counting the things that would obviously be less, but the things that you would buy comparably in the US. And even brand items that, potato chips and cookies and, sort of milk or whatever, is all substantially less. So frankly, the running costs of, a household of two are just a lot less in the US than they are in France. So we've earned our money in the US at, a very high level. Incomes in France are also probably significantly less, that 50 to 60% of what you would find a comparable income level in the US. So we've been able to earn our money at a US level, and now we're able to spend when we're here at a French level. When we go out to dinner, I mean, there's several very wonderful restaurants in town. Honestly, it is rare to exceed 100 to 120 euros for two of us, including a bottle of wine and including appetizers and the main course, dessert, maybe a drink after dinner. That all in, because you're not paying tax and tip on top, is, again, maybe 100 to 120 tops. Even 2-star Michelin restaurants in the next town up in Auch are, 50 to 60 euros per person. Add in wine at $30, and it's an incredible meal, a 3-hour experience for for less than 150 euros. I'll emphasize that again because I think it's a substantial difference. If you tip reasonably in the US, you're tipping 20 to 30%, plus tax, which is, going to be, depending on your state, 8 to 10 to 12%. So you might say, well, the menu prices are comparable, but then you have this, either voluntary or mandated surcharge on top of it of another 40% or more. And so, honestly, it's easy to drop $200 to $300 for a couple for a nice meal out in the US. Here, again, Paris, you can spend a lot of money. 3-star Michelin restaurants, you can spend eye-watering amounts of money. But daily, very exceptional meals, really local produce, marvelously prepared, and you won't pass $100. Go for a pizza, it's 20 bucks, all in for both of you, including a bottle of wine.
Yeah, I think it's clearly an exceptional value for money there. I think just on a regional thing, tipping in France is not really something that you will do outside of cities like Paris, etc. It's accepted that the price is going to be inclusive of a reasonable amount, and especially in the region that I'm from, in the southwest, where I was born. I always say that cash is not king. So if you're actually tipping outrageously a big amount, it will actually play against you. It would be that the owner of the bar, the restaurant, is not doing well in life. It's nearly insulting to him to receive that tip. He would also feel that it's nearly a lack of class or style to give them that kind of value of a tip. So, often you want to do it because you're being kind, you had a good service, etc. But you've got to tip really reasonably in France. If you are going to tip, it's like very small amounts, because otherwise It's nearly insulting to the receiver of the tip. And it's the same with tradesmen, etc. They don't expect you to give them a tip. They don't expect to have any extra money there. The cost includes the services. In fact, that's very similar for most of Europe, right? So it's kind of a different culture indeed to the US. So we're really worthwhile mentioning, because it saves you money. Secondly, it's maybe not going to get you liked in the same manner. And so that's really, really key. I think that's a great way to end today's interview, Gordon. And again, thanks for joining us. But I think so that the general recap is that moving to France, albeit permanently, is going to be cheaper than living in the US. I think that's fair to say. You've done the analysis.
Yes, absolutely. We had when we first bought our house here and told our friends that we were buying the house, we had one of them say, we thought only rich people and movie stars had houses in the south of France. And as I've told many, many people who I've talked to about our experience, it's easier and less expensive than you think. And honestly, waiting, anybody that I would talk to, I would encourage them, if it's what you want and you decided it's what you want, do it. Don't wait.
Yeah, fantastic bit of advice. Of course, we're here to support you with every step of the move. At French Connections, we can help you with from the admin side, of course, with all-inclusive packages. We can help you, of course, with all of the legal aspects of purchasing, and newly, of course, renovations as well. So you can follow us on our channel for more of those bits. You can find Gordon's full renovation story online, available for you all to watch, from start to finish, 7 months, and a few hours and days, perhaps. And more importantly, there's some more stories about Gordon and how they moved to France and what made that happen. So please don't forget to check those out. If you've liked the video today, please give us a like and subscribe. It means a lot to us, and it encourages us to do more videos like this. Of course, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out in the comments. I'm sure, Gordon, you'll be more than happy to share your knowledge with people that are thinking about moving to. So yeah, if you want to get in touch with Gordon, obviously let me know, and I'll be the matchmaker, so to speak. And for all you guys watching and tuning in today, thank you so much for your support. Thank you, Gordon, and for your time today. And we look forward to joining you soon for new stories about France and all of the successes that you've had so far. Maybe let's get the bad points next time, right? Let's try and find the bad.
It'll be a very short video.
Okay, well, maybe that's what you guys want. So again, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comment box below, and make sure to like and subscribe. We'll see you soon on the channel, guys. Speak to you all soon. Gordon, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.